Sejak bergabung dengan Uni Eropa pada tahun 1973, tidak sedikit warga Inggris yang menginginkan kondisi berbeda. Sebagian kalangan merasa Inggris tidak sama dengan negara-negara tetangganya di Eropa Daratan. Kebijakan Uni Eropa pun dianggap terlalu menguasai Inggris. Dan hari ini sebuah referendum untuk menentukan masa depan Inggris digelar. Apakah Inggris akan keluar atau tetap bertahan dalam Uni Eropa? Nah, sejauh mana kemungkinan Brexit atau British exit akan terjadi dan apa saja dampaknya bagi Inggris, Uni Eropa dan juga dunia? Kita bahas dalam Insight malam ini bersama saya, Desi Anwar. Sejarah hubungan Inggris dan Uni Eropa tidak berjalan dengan mulus. Referendum terkait keanggotaan Inggris dalam komunitas Eropa juga pernah digelar pada tahun 1975. Ya, pemirsa, keputusan Inggris untuk keluar atau tetap berada dalam Uni Eropa akan menentukan nasib Inggris ke depan. Nah, bagaimana pengaruh hasil referendum Inggris terhadap sejumlah sektor penting? Saya berikan sedikit ulasannya. Di bidang perdagangan, nah, misalnya, jika Inggris memilih bertahan, Inggris tidak akan mengalami hambatan dagang di pasar tunggal, di mana 45% ekspor Inggris menuju ke Uni Eropa. Namun, bila Inggris melakukan Brexit atau keluar dari Uni Eropa, Inggris harus memperbarui kesepakatan dagang dengan Uni Eropa, namun punya kesempatan lebih besar untuk berdagang, misalnya dengan negara lain seperti Tiongkok, India, dan Amerika Serikat. Jadi bisa memperluas pasar internasionalnya. Sementara dari bidang anggaran, jika Inggris tetap bertahan, Inggris mau tidak mau harus tetap membayar iuran keanggotaan 340 euro setahun per keluarga. Ini berarti jika keluar dari Uni Eropa, Inggris tidak perlu membayar 350 juta euro per minggu kepada Eropa. Nah, Inggris dapat mengalokasikan dana ini untuk misalnya riset ilmiah dan industri baru. Berikutnya, dampak misalnya di bidang regulasi bila bertahan di Inggris, mau tidak mau harus tetap mengikuti regulasi Uni Eropa yang menggantikan sejumlah standar nasional dengan satu standar Eropa. Jadi mau tidak mau tunduklah terhadap peraturan yang dikeluarkan oleh Uni Eropa. Akan tetapi bila keluar atau Brexit, Inggris bisa mengembalikan wewenang Inggris terhadap sejumlah kebijakan, seperti misalnya aturan ketenagakerjaan dan juga kesehatan. Kemudian kita lihat di bidang imigrasi yang merupakan salah satu topik yang menjadi hangat dalam referendum ini. Inggris menganut sistem imigrasi terbuka seperti yang diterapkan Uni Eropa bila tetap bertahan dalam Uni Eropa. Namun bila keluar, Inggris dapat mengubah sistem yang membuat Uni Eropa terbuka bagi imigran dan melakukan sistemnya sendiri. Tidak harus sama dengan apa yang diberlakukan oleh Uni Eropa, sehingga bisa membatasi jumlah imigran yang masuk ke negara. Selanjutnya dalam hal pengaruh, ya, kalau tetap bertahan dalam Uni Eropa, maka dalam konferensi internasional Inggris memiliki dua perwakilan, yaitu Kementerian Luar Negeri dan juga perwakilan Uni Eropa. Namun bila Inggris keluar, maka mau tidak mau akan memperkecil pengaruhnya dalam Uni Eropa. Sementara dalam hubungan internasional, ya Inggris tentu saja bisa memperkuat pengaruhnya dalam kerjasama dan perdagangan bebas, tapi dengan caranya sendiri. Ya, Inggris merupakan salah satu poros kekuatan ekonomi Uni Eropa. Tentunya keluarnya Inggris dikhawatirkan akan mengganggu stabilitas ekonomi Uni Eropa. Jerman misalnya menjadi salah satu negara yang berharap Inggris tetap berada di Uni Eropa.
Ein Austritt Großbritanniens bedeuten würde, dass alles, was mit dem Binnenmarkt zusammenhängt und was zum gegenseitigen Wohle ist, sowohl Großbritanniens als auch aller anderen europäischen Mitgliedstaaten natürlich für Großbritannien dann nicht mehr zur Verfügung stünde und dass jede Art von Verhandlung, die wir heute als gemeinsame Mitglieder von 28 Mitgliedstaaten führen, dann eine Verhandlung von 27 wäre mit jemandem, der eben ein Drittstaat ist. Und ich kann mir nicht vorstellen, dass das von Vorteil ist.
Ya, Brexit atau Remain, in atau out? Inilah pertanyaannya. Setelah informasi berikut ini kita akan membahas mengenai referendum Inggris serta dampaknya secara global bersama seorang narasumber yang akan hadir bersama saya di studio. Tetaplah bersama Insight. Bersama Insight dalam debat televisi terakhir di Inggris, kedua kubu pro dan kontra Brexit menampilkan juru kampanye masing-masing. Kubu pro Uni Eropa diwakili Wali Kota London Sadikan, sementara mantan Wali Kota London Boris Johnson mewakili kubu Brexit. Nah, perdebatan bermuara pada isu imigrasi, perdagangan hingga kedaulatan.
Why we're the fifth richest country is because our role is enhanced by being in the European Union. Right. We're at the table helping the rules be made.
Our entire trade negotiating policy is consecrated, is handed over to the EU Commission, where only 3.6% of the officials actually come from our country. And it is no wonder that they have not been, as Andrea rightly says, they have not been able to do essential free trade deals with China, with India, with all the growth economies of the world, including America. Ya, sementara itu lebih dari 46 juta warga Inggris berhak berpartisipasi dalam referendum Inggris yang berlangsung pada hari ini tanggal 23 Juni dari pukul 7 pagi hingga 10 malam waktu setempat. Nah, hasil referendum ini tidak hanya membawa perubahan bagi Inggris dan Uni Eropa, namun juga berdampak secara global. Nah, untuk membahas lebih dalam, saya telah ditemani di studio oleh Adrian Short, Ketua dari The British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia atau Kamar Dagang Inggris di Indonesia. Hello, Adrian. Thank you. It's good to have you with us. A very historic time for the UK and for Europe, as a matter of fact. Now, you're here, so far away from home in Jakarta. Does it mean you don't get to vote in the referendum, or what's happening there?
No, people who have registered are able to vote if they're overseas, but there is a certain cut-off period. I think it's around about 15 years. If you've been abroad for more than 15 years, then you unfortunately cannot vote, but many expats or immigrants, as we are able to vote.
How about
in
you?
that.
Do you get a chance? I mean, have you been away for more than 15 years?
No, I haven't, so I have had a chance to vote.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Leave or remain?
That's
secret?
That's a very individual matter. There is very strong opinions on both sides, and I'm sure many people are fascinated by the coverage that you've seen. So, but it is very much, as you say, an historic day here in London, particularly and back in the UK.
I mean, it's fascinating even for us here in Indonesia just to see how polarizing and they say that it's very close between the Leave camp and the Remain camp. Let's just give us a sort of a perspective about this Brexit thing. I mean, why did it actually come about? I mean, England, the UK has been part of the European Economic Community since it had a referendum in 1975 to join. And now in 2016, there's this desire, at least for almost 50% of the population, to actually leave the European community, the European Union. Why is that? What are the main sort of events that have led up to this, do you think?
Well, Desi, you rightly point out that the UK has been part of the European Union or the EEC since before 1975, and there was a referendum. Since 1973. That 1975 was the last referendum that the British people had on the staying or working and being part of Europe. At that time, there were around about 9 countries and around 250 million people in those 9 countries as a nation. What we've had over periods of time is that grow to 28 nations. We've had various other treaties come into place in Lisbon, Maastricht and others, which have enhanced and grown what the European Union is about. And some of that has been very, very positive, but in the eyes of some, it's not been the case, and people feel that they haven't had a chance to have an opinion on whether the union is a good thing or not. So after 40 years, before the last election, David Cameron made a pledge that if the Conservatives were to win the election, he would actually offer a vote to the people on a referendum of Europe. And here we are today.
Yes.
That wish,
and the whole thing's blowing on his face, because now apparently the Brexit camp is also, especially we've seen it led by Boris Johnson, is very, very vocal. And I just want to know your take on the actual moment or the campaigns leading up to today, Adrian. Why is it so polarized? Why is there so much emotion about this referendum? And what is it really about? Is it really about, the UK's membership in the European Union, or is it about something else? There's other fears there besides just the economics or even, sovereignty aspect of it.
Well, I think you've called it as it is. I think what the referendum is about, it's about people having different views on what Europe means to them. There is obviously the trade benefits and balances, but on the other hand, we have seen some growth in immigration throughout the UK, as has the world. We've seen a lot of people movement across the globe. But for some people, that, is a challenge on their services within individual towns and places. So there is a strong feeling sometimes about how much movement of people they can absorb. And they feel that because we're part of the global Europe, that there is no control on that, be that as their view. And then there are others who are saying, well, but this gives everybody the opportunity across Europe to be part of a single community. And we should embrace that and be very, very positive towards it. I don't think that actually the UK is unique to any other European country. If you look at some of the polls that have been conducted across Europe on whether they should have a referendum, it's reasonably evenly split, around 50-50. And in some countries, there are countries that are saying, we really don't feel that the European Union is representative of us anymore. So opinion is divided. And I think that opportunity for the referendum in the UK is good, it's unique, and it's historic.
So it's a good thing.
It's good to have the referendum in some ways because at least people get to voice. We get the situation out there in the open. I think the disappointing thing over the last months with the referendum has been some of the campaigning and propaganda. I think on both sides we've seen statistics used.
And some nasty words being, thrown about, and bad blood between the two camps. I mean, it seems very sort of un-British in a lot of ways, no? Or is it to be expected?
I think we're entering a new era whereby people are looking at this and saying, OK, I want to build my case. And because the case is complex, it's not easy. It's not one single point of issue. You see some people have challenges or concerns about control, sovereignty, immigration, trade. So there are lots of facets where people believe in a stronger Europe and others believe in a UK going alone. So there are lots of facets. And unfortunately, during the campaign, the statistics have been used to actually sometimes try to persuade people from one side to the other, not necessarily in the best way. The statistics have been used in ways that are designed to influence but have not really been a good reflection on the campaign.
But do you get the sense, as an ordinary voter, I mean, you really know what you're doing and you really know what you're voting for? Because, for example, the Remain, you know, they talk about, you know, the 500 million population and the European Union. It's, you know, it's an important market for the UK, but on the other hand, there's this fear of immigration. We've seen, you know, sort of the flood of refugees and migrant workers and, you know, people coming to perhaps UK and taking away jobs and so on and so forth. But do you really get a sense that the British people know exactly what it is that they're voting for and they're doing it with their eyes open? Or is it a lot of it's more sort of an emotional, knee-jerk response to some of the things that are going on in the world at the moment? I
think there is a combination. I think fear has been used widely by both sides in this campaign to shape the agenda. I think people are pretty well informed. I've never seen so many people having a voice on an issue. They may not fully understand it, but they have an opinion, and that's good because it means that people have engaged in the process. And I'm expecting the turnout to be very high. When we have normal elections, the general elections, there seems to be less engagement, less people talking about this. This has really been, and it's a historic moment. Some people have been doing their research. They may not fully understand it. There may be some emotional elements to that, but that's to be understood in any country. You know, you are wondering what the future holds. And
so there is this
really
sense
knows.
that this is, you know, the future for everybody who lives in England, in the UK, but also for Europe, because we see that how the European countries also following very, very closely, as does, you know, the United States of America, and as so do we. It's very, very interesting. But we'll take a little break to see what kind of impact leaving the EU means and also remaining in the EU. Ya, kita lihat ini merupakan suatu referendum yang sangat bersejarah bagi Inggris saat ini, karena ini akan menentukan masa depan negara ini untuk ke depan. Kita akan lanjutkan membahas perkiraan dampak referendum serta antisipasi yang dilakukan dunia usaha Inggris sesaat lagi. Ya, masih dalam Insight, banyak kalangan yang mencemaskan ketidakpastian hasil referendum Inggris, terlebih bila hasilnya ternyata Inggris keluar dari Uni Eropa. Nah, pasar uang akan kembali goyah seperti pada tahun 1992 silam. Pound sterling anjlok dan mempengaruhi beberapa mata uang dunia, termasuk dolar Amerika. Berikut ulasan dari Nina Dos Santos, editor Eropa, CNN Money.
UK's referendum on its membership of the EU looms ever closer, while central bankers and market makers right around the world are keeping their eyes peeled for the outcome, and they're also concerned about the uncertainty that it generates. Janet Yellen, for the second time in just 1 month, decided this week to highlight the potential uncertainty coming from the outcome of the UK's referendum as one of the reasons why the US economy is engaging in a very measured interest rate raising cycle, and that rates are not coming up quite as quickly as at the start of the year many people had been expecting. Mario Draghi, the head of the central bank that governs policy across the Eurozone, the ECB, he also this week admitted that, frankly, nobody knows where things would go if the UK were to decide to leave the EU. The rest of the EU is a major trading area for the UK, and as such he has said that when it comes to the Eurozone, well, the central bank there would be ready to act to pump more money into the system to try and buffer any kind of headwinds that come from a potential Brexit. But it hasn't been the equity markets that have really borne the brunt of this. It has been the currency markets, particularly the pound, which has now tracked back up to the level that it was at before this referendum was called, as some of the polls showed that the Remain side had managed to gain a little bit more traction, although all in all we should still point out that the polls are too close to call at this point. When it comes to the pound, George Soros this week himself added his name to the list of people who said that the pound could plunge maybe 15–20% if we were to see a Brexit take place, and he warned Britons the only people who would benefit from this kind of situation would be the currency speculators. And he should know he is arguably the most famous currency speculator anywhere in the world, having made $1 billion back in 1992 betting against the UK pound when it had a big devaluation on a day that was called Black Friday. And as the pound has been particularly choppy, people have also decided to put their money into other safe haven investments as well, notably gold. In fact, what we saw was the British pound having its biggest swing against gold since all the way back in 2014. Now, commodity speculators are saying that this particular precious metal could head back towards 1,400 if we were to see significant turbulence created in the markets in the event of a so-called Brexit. Nina Dos Santos, CNN Money, London.
Ya, lalu bagaimana dunia usaha Inggris mengantisipasi hasil referendum? Kita lanjutkan perbincangan bersama Adrian Short, Ketua the British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, Kamar Dagang Inggris di Indonesia. Adrian, a lot of uncertainty there, especially if, for example, should the referendum ends up with the UK deciding to leave the European Union, the so-called Brexit. I mean, already we've seen, George Soros saying it's going to be gloom and doom for Britain, and a lot of jitters in global market, including in the United States. You and your business community, what are your thoughts? I mean, what happens if, say, for example, Brexit is the option?
Okay, well, if you're specifically talking about Brexit, then what happens is that a lot of businesses have started to make contingency plans already around this to look at their investments and other portfolios. But generally, I think nobody is really certain as to what will happen in the markets. There is undoubtedly going to be a short-term spike and shock in the markets, particularly the currency markets, as you refer to. But the longer-term plan around that is difficult to know and to predict. What we will enter probably then is we will see Article 50 of the European Union framework come into play. And what will happen then is we will have 2 years of negotiation. So we're basically talking about a 2-year process following the result, if it goes the way of Brexit. Now, for businesses, that really does mean that we've got a period of uncertainty. Nobody knows what the negotiation will be, and nobody knows how that will pan out. So I suspect that some investments will be withheld or hold back, and others will try and seek comfort or understanding of how the European Union reacts to that event.
So it's still very much a big question mark at the moment. Nobody really knows. But it seems that it's been agreed that at least for the first few years there will be some kind of downturn, some kind of negative economic impact to the country, obviously, as it's trying to find a new footing. I mean, what would, for investors and, for example, for business people, they would rather leave things as the way they are, right? I mean, or
a lot of businesses, particularly multinational companies, as you've seen from the lists of companies coming out, and economists as well have said, this is a period of uncertainty, of instability, and that in itself it's not something that is a good thing for businesses to operate in. So a lot of the bigger companies, particularly those who are trading in Europe and around the globe, really want certainty. So for Britain to vote to remain in the Union would give them that level of certainty for them to start replanning their businesses almost immediately following the election date. If it's smaller businesses, then some smaller businesses who are in the European Union, within Britain, they may have a different view because they may be facing some regulatory parts of the European Union regulation that are having an impact or cost adding to their business. So there is a divide. You can't say that the business community is whole in its view, but certainly at the top end with the MNCs, we see that very clearly coming out, that they want the certainty of a Remain win and that therefore is time to spur on and get back onto what business wants. That's a government that is talking about investment. That's a government that is concentrating on delivering for businesses, for people in the long term, rather than one that is in a period of negotiation, inward-facing, and not really able to give clear guidance or clarity to the business environment.
But you said that this is something that the business community in the UK and businesses such as yourself under the British Chamber of Commerce, something that you anticipated and made contingency plans for, you said.
A number of businesses have, not every business has, but those contingency plans are only taking it so far in the early stages. Nobody can really predict what this means for the longer term.
Okay, in terms of the technicalities, if, for example, the Brexit happened, so what does it mean in terms of economic cooperation that has been, the whole Europe, it's been integrated so far up to today, and also what does it mean in terms of the trade agreements for the UK to be out on its own as a separate island from the rest of the continental Europe?
Okay, so the first thing is that we would see a period of working with the European Union and to understand what the terms are for a Brexit, because this has not been done. This is unique. This is something that hasn't happened in the history of the European Union. So nobody can really predict how people react. Once the heads have cooled, once people have realised what potential consequences are, once the markets have got over their reaction, we'll enter a period of sort of thinking what through the consequences. Britain has, and the campaigns have said then, we are free to start negotiating our independent trade deals with the rest of the world, which is true. But
including the 27 other European countries under the European Union. Does that mean that Britain would have to completely renegotiate their trade deals? I mean, until now it's always been part of the one single market. Would you have to go and knocking on people's doors and say, hey, look?
That's not exactly how it worked, because the EU will negotiate trade contracts as a bloc. So the EU will come to the UK and talk to them about how the terms of any future agreement. It won't be going around or the UK going around each one. There will be a collective view and a collective decision. But beyond Europe is where it gets more interesting.
Like, for example, the US, India, China.
Well, let's talk about Indonesia.
Indonesia, absolutely, yes.
Indonesia is in the middle of looking at a CEPA, a Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Europe. And that process was started during the President's visit to Europe earlier this year. Now, that is an ongoing process, and it's hoped that that will be completed within 2 years, but it's possibly going to take longer. So you see, these trade deals do take time. That was a trade deal that started back in 2012 in terms of negotiations. So they are quite complex and they're quite long in terms of doing that. Where Britain would need to do is it would need to then follow through and strike its own trade deal if it was outside of the bloc. So if it's inside, then those trade deals which are under negotiation currently become easier to fulfil. But notwithstanding that, if the UK was out there in the wider world making trade deals, it would have a little bit more flexibility, because it would only have itself on one side of the table against the other party negotiating on the other side of the table, as opposed to 28 views and requirements in one. So you could see a little bit more agility, but in reality, it would probably not be able to strike as good a trade deal as it would as part of a bigger...
And it's just a lot more work, at the end of the day. I mean, having to do things on your own. Okay, we'll take a little break here, Adrian, but we will continue along these lines. Dan kita akan kembali untuk membahas lebih jauh terkait dampak lebih luas terhadap hasil referendum Inggris. Tetaplah bersama Insight. Ya, masih bersama Insight, kita membahas referendum Inggris serta apa saja dampaknya bagi dunia, khususnya Uni Eropa. Saya ditemani Adrian Short, ketua dari the British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia atau Kamar Dagang Inggris di Indonesia. So basically, if there is Brexit at the end of the day, I mean, there's a great deal of uncertainty, but for the Brexit campaigners, after a while, when things stabilize, then basically England can just, or the UK can just take off and start doing negotiations on themselves. And for example, opening other new markets, for example, the United States, India, China, and including Indonesia. So do you, how much bigger is this an opportunity in terms of making the UK sort of a much more significant economic player in the world by going solo?
Okay, well, let's understand that if we weren't going solo and we stay, those negotiations will be done anyway. So we will be benefiting if we stay and remain. If we go alone, then we have to begin those negotiations and we have to work out how we are well placed versus the other trade negotiators in terms of how to do this. Now, this is quite a skill, and we would have to try and regain the skill of that negotiation. So to negotiate a free trade deal, we need to get the right people on our side, the right experts and experience. So it's quite it's a longer process than many may give it credit for. But you rightly say that if independently we can go and strike trade deals, that may have benefits because of being quicker and to the market, and only having our own concerns around the trade deal.
Yes, in your own interest. You only take care of your own interest. Okay, so for example, if the referendum says yes, we will remain in the European Union, what does it mean? How will the UK, move forward with the European Union? Obviously, a lot of things would need to change, and there's some reforms needed, or some kind of leverage that the UK would need to sort of, gain in order to get more favourable, condition and situation for the UK for remaining in Europe.
Okay, well, that's really interesting because our Prime Minister went and negotiated early this year certain conditions for staying, and the first thing would happen is that those would have to be met by the European Union on the basis that we've remained in the European Union. So that first part of the negotiation will be interesting to see that those promises, those commitments are fulfilled. Beyond that is down to the appetite of the UK and Europe. If Europe, or the EU should I say, rather, sees the referendum and however, if it's very close, they may look at that and think, well, obviously, why is there so many people that aren't keen on what basically should be a fundamentally beneficial model for all countries? So hopefully there would be a period of reflection, but this is only my view, that they would look at how can we bring more people to love the EU and to be part of that, because as I said, there are polls in other countries that are happening, just polls but not referendums, that are suggesting that there is an equal number of people who are not quite sure that this is right. Now, so fundamentally something that is working needs to be improved, but the appetite for improvement we will see. Hopefully that is there, and hopefully we would see much more thinking around some of the key issues that the campaigns have brought out and how we may deal with those to make it better for everybody. But let's not forget, this whole referendum is coming at a time when the European economies are not strong.
Absolutely.
It's not against a backdrop of thriving economies, great and ambitious trade. So in terms of timing, I think it's been difficult, and I suspect that when this was thought through, we were hoping that the economy of Europe and the UK and the world would be on a more upward trajectory. Yeah,
and the question of immigration, obviously, with the refugees and also just the increased number of migration coming from the Middle East and also North Africa coming into Europe, as well as from the eastern part of Europe into the UK. Now, talk to me a little bit about the immigration aspect, and of course there's sort of movement to the right amongst many of these countries, particularly in France and in Germany, for example, and sort of a pushback against immigration, including in the UK, what makes this referendum very, very sort of close, so to speak.
Yes, sure. Immigration is a very emotive subject, and it's a very difficult one to manage. In the UK, roughly 50-50 immigration that's coming in at the moment is 50% from within the EU and 50% from outside of the EU. And it has, and traditionally many economists can show the benefits that immigration has had on the economy in terms of growth, in terms of investment, and in terms of building a better society. And more progressive society. But the challenge is it has to be done at a level that people are comfortable with, that they can absorb. So it's important that that people feel that the services that they have, that everything that works in the UK can continue to work, and that includes Europe as well. So we're in unprecedented times. I think there are more movement of people now than ever, and that builds a strain on every country. in the globe.
But are the fears founded, do you think, against immigration and as a whole?
I can't speak for my fellow UK, but I'm sure that some people have fears around immigration. They look at it and they will be concerned. How realistic that is and how much that's just based on a single moment or a single view, it's difficult to know. But if people feel that it's too much and they feel that way, then that's going to bring out a certain way of reacting to this referendum and to the way that they see things going.
Especially when the economy is not doing well, then normally immigration is one of the things that they focus on, you know. But coming back to the reaction to European countries, because they've been following, and I think, you know, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, is extremely worried if Brexit does take place, and even, you know, President Obama was sort of making sort of threatening noises about, you know, Britain has to go back to the back of the queue when it comes to trade deals. How do you see the reactions of the rest of the European countries if, for example, Brexit does happen or towards this referendum?
I think there'll be a surprise and a shock to the system. I think it will then take cool heads to sit down and think what this really means and how the community can react. I mean, we've heard from a lot of people making their positions very clear, and the important thing is to think through what this may mean for the whole of the global economy, because the shocks that occur will be felt. There will be ripples around the world, hopefully short-lived, but then it's about how do we make things work if indeed we end up with the result of an exit.
But will it be the end of the European Union as we know it? And will we see other countries following suit? Because Britain is the 5th largest economy in the world. Britain plays a big part in the integrity and the prosperity of the European Union. Do you think?
It's very difficult to know that answer to that question specifically. I think it will be a big and a difficult shock for the EU. Will it see the end of the EU? There are predictors that will say, well, this is the start of something different. Personally, I think that it will unite some of the countries together a bit more and to think about things. And maybe a period of reflection during this 2 years of negotiation would be beneficial. I don't myself and many others think that this is the start of some change, complete change in the European Union. Better it doesn't happen. Better that we see less of this disruption to the world economy and to the European economy, and we start to then build straight away with investments. We start to plan for the future from Friday. If we have the exit, then we have this period again of uncertainty. And business wants certainty, people want certainty, and I think that's important, how we manage that.
Yes, although certainty is something of a rare commodity these days. You know, the world is full of surprises, full of very surprising, you know, political figures as well. And we see, you know, all the very, you know, colourful politicians and, you know, saying things that are very polarizing, very emotional. And anyway, we take a quick break, Adrian, but we will continue setelah informasi berikut ini, perbincangan mengenai referendum Inggris. Kita akan lanjutkan sesaat lagi dan mungkin apa dampaknya terhadap kita di Indonesia. Iya, kita kembali dalam Insight. Meski kecil pengaruhnya bagi Indonesia, Menteri Keuangan Bambang Brojonegoro menyayangkan ya bila hasil referendum menyatakan Inggris itu berpisah dari Uni Eropa. Nah, keluarnya Inggris sebagai negara dengan perekonomian terbesar setelah Jerman tentu akan menimbulkan gejolak baru di sistem keuangan global. Indonesia juga tidak bisa menghindari gejolak tersebut yang tentu akan berdampak pada mata uang maupun pasar modal Indonesia.
Ini pasti akan menimbulkan gejolak mungkin di EU, khususnya ke mata uang euro, mungkin ke pasar modalnya, dan juga akan berimbas kepada keuangan dunia, keuangan global. Ya, tentunya kita harapkan kalaupun itu terjadi, sifatnya hanya sementara sampai ada equilibrium baru, yaitu EU tanpa Inggris. Tapi kami masih melihat, masih besar kemungkinan Inggris untuk tetap stay di EU, karena buat Inggris sendiri, banyak sekali keuntungannya kalau dia adalah bagian dari EU.
Ya, kita lanjutkan perbincangan bersama Adrian Short, Ketua the British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia atau Kamar Dagang Inggris di Indonesia. Adrian, we just saw a little bit of comment by the Minister of Finance saying that he is hoping that there will not be any Brexit, that the UK will still stay within the European Union. But say, Indonesia and the UK, we are, like the rest of the world, is following what's happening in the UK and the results of the referendum. But you, from your perspective here, as someone who is now living in and working in Indonesia, how do you see this? How will this impact relations in the future? I mean, earlier mentioned in President Jokowi's visit to the UK, and there's some kind of memorandum of understandings on various trade deals, bilateral trade deals. I mean, will this have any impact at all? Or?
For a short period of time, I think, whilst everybody understands how this works, I'm sure that there will be, some initial concerns. But I think, actually, deep down, the relationship between the UK and Indonesia is fundamentally strong. The UK is a big investor in Indonesia and has been for many years. And many of our members of the British Chambers will be very prepared to work and invest and make sure that the relationship with Indonesia is fundamentally strong, as it always has been. You talked about the President's visit. We, as the British Chambers, signed memorandums of understandings with Kadin in order to strengthen our relationships and make sure that we are able for our members to provide the right services, the right matchmaking, to continue to develop trade and investment. So I don't think necessarily we're going to see a huge concern in businesses. They'll still see Indonesia as a fantastic market. The UK for Indonesia is also seen as a very trusted partner. So after this initial concern, if we do exit, if we're not, we continue as is and build on strength to strength. If we do, I'm sure there'll be a little period of reflection, but ultimately this has been a relationship going back centuries. So I believe that the countries are strong enough to manage our way and seek the partnerships. And in some cases, it may see stronger relationships because Britain, in the event of an exit from Europe, will have to start to venture out even more than it has done in the past. And we are
without
great
feeling
traders.
Hampered by this EU train.
I wonder sometimes whether we play over the, being hampered and being able to be free. We've been trading for centuries around the world. So we've got capability at individual company levels to be able to manage this. And so we will continue to do so. And our relationships with Indonesia, with British companies investing here and partnering here, have been great. So from my perspective,
we can do more because in terms of that trade balance, I mean, the amount of trade between Indonesia and the UK is not really that big. I mean, maybe this is actually an opportunity, like you say, for in the future for the UK to actually really, really focus on this part of the world.
Well, during Prime Minister Cameron's visit in 2012, there was an agreement that we would look to treble trade over the next 5 years. So there's a real target there, to try and do more. We understand that there is much, much more opportunity here for British businesses to do more. And I think that driving and continuation will do. Look, at the Chamber, we're seeing companies coming here and investing. We're seeing many, many other businesses looking at Indonesia as a marketplace. And we're also seeing a lot of opening up within Indonesia with the various packages, with the changes to the D&I list. Then this is actually a good place to be. So if we can sometimes move away from some of the challenges we're seeing in Europe right now and actually look at the wider world, then Indonesia is a fantastic opportunity for businesses
this is
to come.
still where the growth is, right? I mean, even though we are not achieving our growth target, but we are still around the 5%, so which is not bad, say, compared to some other parts of the world. But Adrian, as the Indonesia plus the ASEAN countries, as of this year, we're part of the ASEAN economic community, so to speak. We're doing exactly sort of the opposite of what some of the British people want to do, which is actually, wanting to go and doing things on their own. I mean, what is this sort of globalization sentiment that you see is coming up, really? Because the trend now is actually to merge, to work together, to have trade agreements, whether it's AFTA, the ASEAN Economic Community, or all these other things.
Well, if we look at it from a trade perspective, which I tend to do, being in the roles that I am, I think that this is opportunities for ASEAN and others to come together, to work closer together. I think the important thing is to look at how Europe's evolved, look at how that has moved in its own way, and to take a view of each of those steps and say, at what point was it? And history will have this very clearly. Depending on the result tomorrow, there'll still be lots of articles and lots of interesting information out there. So from an ASEAN perspective, there's a huge amount of learning that can come through this experience. So for some of the pain that we're feeling right now in how divided the people are on the subject of this can be learned from. And I think this is an exceptional opportunity for ASEAN to work together and to work out and make sure that the partnership builds on very strong foundations and that it is collaborative and that it brings everybody. It's also smaller in terms of the number of countries. And in that way, the ability to negotiate
the number of population here in ASEAN
equivalent.
is 600 million. I mean, it's huge. I mean, we are actually using this moment to integrate, to become one big family. And here you are, the UK, trying to sort of move off on your own. I'm just trying to see the logic and where does it actually, come from, this kind of sentiment? Is it some sort of nostalgia for the past when, the Britannia ruled the waves and the British Empire and so on? Or because, I get the sense that at the end of the day, a lot of the British people don't feel that they're sort of part of the continental family. They're more sort of much more adventurous and alone doing things, and they're happier doing that.
Well, there's quite a lot of sentiment in that.
Because the world now has changed. We're so global. We're very interconnected in everything, and in terms of security, terrorism, drugs, trafficking, and trade, and all sorts of things. The world is actually integrating.
The world is integrating and globalising, and we've seen that. And many businesses, particularly British businesses, are engaged in that and are centre stage in terms of developing the relationships across the globe, building global supply chains, building headquarters around the world, being closer to their customers, where their customers are, and that's particularly in Asia for a lot of businesses. So we are seeing an engagement by Britain in the world. So it's not as, I don't think, looking at a nostalgic view. There will be a sentiment of that. Some people will have a view. But to be realistic, we always have and always will play a part in the world. And I think within Remain, we play that with Europe and we play it well. If there is an exit, then I think what we have to do is to say, OK, how do we continue to do what we've always done? And that's innovate, that is to be entrepreneurial, that is to be creative, and that is to create harmony across the globe with various countries. And it's fundamentally important that what we don't do is reverse ourselves on either decision and start fighting and infighting again. I think what we need to do is to draw a line and decide how is it to get the best foot forward from this. And I think too much introspective behaviour would not be good for anyone. So I'm really looking forward to a government and British businesses being out there and forging and working hard together to make this, our country and Europe preferably a best and great place to trade with. ASEAN, yes, is equivalent in size to the European Union. It's over 9 countries, and I would like to see and think that over a gradual period of time with good negotiations, we will see a very much stronger ASEAN that will be developed and become a real significant global market and global player.
Just an observation from my side, the only sort of country or figure that's happy about this referendum thing is, I mean, like I said, the United States, President Obama is not happy at all, maybe Europe's not happy at all. Putin, Russia, he seems to be quite happy to see, if, for example, the referendum does end up Brexit. I mean, what does it say? Just very quickly, the way things work, because it's not just all about trade and the economy. It is about how we basically work together in this very globalized world.
Yes, I mean, I'm speaking very much from a trade perspective, and you mentioned Putin there, and I think he's being quoted by many people as being this or being that, wanting us to stay, wanting us to go. Depending on who's got a view, we've not actually seen him stand up and say it as it is, as has Barack Obama. for example. So I think we risk just putting words into his mouth and making him to be part of the equation. Quite frankly, we don't know. And for us, we should be basing ourselves on what the judgments are of the people that are saying, you know, what they want, people who are speaking up, because otherwise it's used to frame a debate by either one way or the other that isn't usually that helpful. It's really those people that are stood there and saying, this is what I believe and this is how I want the future to look. That's what I believe in. What I really hope is that when those people stand up and say that, they're basing it on good facts and they're not misleading people.
Okay, well, Adrian, thank you very much. It's been an interesting conversation, and also at this moment we still don't know. It could be either way, so it will be very, very interesting, and like, you know, who knows at this moment, but we are all following. Again, thank you very much for joining me on Insight. Nah, Brexit atau British Exit menjadi referendum ini berskala nasional yang ketiga kalinya digelar di Inggris. Hasil referendum Inggris ini akan menjadi penentu nasib perekonomian dan kondisi masyarakat Inggris ke depan. Di sisi lain, Uni Eropa sendiri telah berkembang pesat dari 6 negara anggota awal menjadi sekarang 28 negara dengan berbagai tantangan global yang memang harus dihadapi bersama. Sebagai kekuatan ekonomi terbesar kelima di dunia, hasil referendum Inggris ini tentunya tidak hanya berdampak pada masyarakat Inggris dan Uni Eropa saja, tapi juga berdampak secara global. Nah, kita tunggu hasilnya nanti seperti apa. Apakah akan terjadi Brexit atau mungkin Remain. Demikian Insight hari ini. Saksikan Insight besok bersama saya Desi Anwar. Bye-bye.